Hello, good morning, everyone. Please, can we start now? We are a little delayed. I hope that everyone feels good. It's Saturday, last day, and big day. And today, I am the honor to introduce a person that I really admire a lot of. Before, I want to read quickly a poem of Eduardo Galeano. The poem is called The Nobodies, who are not but could be, who don't speak languages but dialects, who don't have religions but superstitions, who don't create art but handicrafts, who don't have culture but folklore, who are not human beings but human resources, who don't have faces but arms, who don't have names but numbers, who do not appear in the history of the world but in the police blotter of local papers. The nobodies who are not worth the bullet that kills them. And why I choose this poem, it's because Nanette Snob, the last year, has tried to change the balance of power with incredible courage. And she works hard to give voices and a place to the nobodies. Welcome, Nanette. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Adriana. Hello, good morning. Dear colleagues, it's early in the morning. So, yeah, staying with the trouble. It's a good thing today for me, on a personal, professional level, to have this lecture, to have this keynote with the title Staying with the Trouble. I would like to quote Donna Haraway. We, all of us on Terra, live in disturbing times, mixed up times, troubling and turbid times. The task is to become capable with each other in all of our bumptious kinds of response. Our task is to make trouble, to stir up potent response to devastating events, as well as to settle troubled waters and rebuild quiet places. Staying with the trouble requires learning to be truly present, not as a vanishing pivot between awful or Edenic past and apocalyptic or salvific futures, but as mortal critters entwined in myriad unfinished configurations of places, times, matters, meanings. The title of my keynote is a direct reference to ecofeminist Donna Haraway's book, Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Slutuscene, in which she calls for new ways of non-linear thinking in an age when old methodologies and epistemologies are clearly failing. Haraway advises collaborative approaches to learning to live and die together on a damaged earth. In her introduction, Haraway writes, and I quote, "Trouble is an interesting word. It derives from a 13th century French verb meaning to stir up, to make cloudy, to disturb. We all of us on Terra live in disturbing times, mix-up times. So, mix-up times are overflowing with both pain and joy, with vastly unjust patterns of pain and joy, with unnecessary killing of ongoingness, but also with necessary resurgence. The task is to make kin in lines of inventive connection as a practice of learning to live and die well with each other in a thick present. Our task is to make trouble, to stir up potent response to devastating events, as well as to settle troubled waters. and rebuild quiet places. What I understand from this is firstly that we must respond to this challenging situation from the position we find ourselves in, from the present moment. In other words, we need to work with what we have right now, and we are in trouble. And perhaps I'm also a troublemaker. We are all entwined, as Haraway points out. We and the museum we work in are intimately and inevitably connected to our histories and geographies, and to ideas and ways of operating that shape what we do. The act of staying with the trouble is a call for new stories through acts of joy, empathy, solidarity, co-authorship, collaboration, and innovation, and also embracing discomfort. In the case of the museum is a portal that offers us a chance to rethink our world. But is that really possible? Is the museum really able of that, taking into account these structures, his violent, racist structures? After long years of attempting making museums more fluid, leaky, but also more generous, I have to admit that I'm sometimes overwhelmed by pessimism. We note that many of museums are taking the commitment to the project of decolonization in efforts to both dismantle and shift narratives, newly privileging identities and voices long suppressed or misrepresented by the majority. So let's take together the hard road to stay with the trouble. I will show you my little road here this morning. I would like to quote Eduardo Galeano. I believe in memory, in his book Memory of Fire. Eduardo Galeano writes, I believe in memory, not as a place of revival, but as point of departure, a catapult throwing you into present times, allowing you to imagine the future instead of accepting it. Poor history had stopped breathing, betrayed in academic text, lied about in classrooms, drowned in dates. They had imprisoned her in museums and buried her with floral wreaths beneath statuary, bronze, and monumental marble. Objects and people are entangled in individual and collective interest, snared in conflicts over appropriation and caught up in narrative knots. This is a difficult time for ethnographic museums, with collections embedded in colonial violence. Museums are in panic and also in a kind of European battle, a decolonial conquest, not this time the colonial conquest, but a decolonial conquest in the 21st century is happening. We are now living in a kind of interregnum between old and new, balances of power, and museums have to manage this in-between period in a context of geopolitical changes where Europe is no longer at the center, but has not yet fully realized this new fact. Yes, decolonization is on every museum director's lips. But decolonization is about power relations, and saying goodbye to white privilege is not an easy task. So how do we weather this storm? How can we ensure that this boat, this museum ship, is light and flexible enough to stay afloat, to stay on troubled waters? Today, we need to reflect on how museums have erased a plural memory in favor of promoting a single point of view. My program is all about revealing, inverting, rewriting, and reinterpreting colonial narratives by making connections to histories that have been silenced or intentionally erased? How can we make silences speak to confront inequalities of power in the production of narratives about colonial history? But how can this be done within a white hegemonic system designed to exclude those who are in fact the people most concerned? How can this be done in a structure where the bureaucracy that has the last word is in denial about the injustices it is perpetuating? How can we resist the bureaucratic structures and methods that nip in the bud any initiative that attempts to untie the knots of the museum system? We therefore urgently need a museum that disseminates a plurality of stories, a multivocal museum. Abandoning the European or Western view of the world means putting forward a multi-perspectivity of history and histories. Different perspectives on collections and colonial history and beyond colonial history itself need to be integrated into museum work at all levels. But who is making this story up? History, according to the Haitian historian and anthropologist Michel Rolf Trouillot, is the fruit, and I quote, is the fruit of power, but power itself is never so transparent that its analysis becomes redundant. The ultimate mark of power may be its invisibility, the ultimate challenge, the exposition of its roots. So how to deal with the ghosts from the past in ethnographic museums? How to deal with this violent present? And I quote again Haraway, our task, yes, is to make trouble, to stir up potent response to devastating events, as well as to settle troubled waters and rebuild quiet places. So how to change conservation, these places of conservation, into conversation? So how? Yes, so how? Here at the Rouzenstraal Joost Museum in Cologne, we have some instructions for use. We have some attempts where we try to open up the museum and to make this museum leaky and to try to produce multivocal narratives inside the museum, and this is through providing platforms and with the risk to be sometimes also paternalistic. So when we speak about providing platforms, this idea of welcoming communities, open up your doors, here already there is this risk of paternalism. The idea of carte blanche, giving carte blanche, creating autonomous spaces where activists, communities, artists can present their own spaces and totally decide of what they would like to tell. And we call this kind of autonomous spaces, it's yours, it's up to you, the floor is yours. So in our museum in Cologne, we initiated an exhibition about anti-colonial resistance in the Global South, and the name is Resist, the Art of Resistance. And also here, the idea was in the museum when I started in 2019, instead of making an exhibition about colonial history, we would like to speak about the histories and the narratives of anti-colonial resistance in the Global South. And we created several autonomous spaces where activists, artists, scholars, curators could make their own micro exhibitions inside this exhibition space. I would like to give some examples in this exhibition. For example, we gave a room, here you see some pictures of the exhibition, which was in 2021 in the middle of COVID and until January 2022. And here we have, for example, a space curated by the artist and art historian Peju Laiwola, and also she comes from Nigeria. Her father was the King Akensua II, king of the Benin Kingdom, and perhaps you have heard about this huge restitution of Benin royal artworks from Germany to Nigeria. In December, 5 museums signed the transfer of ownership, so the transfer of their entire Benin artworks collections to Nigeria. But here we are long before this restitution. At that time, when we had this idea of this exhibition, we were in 2019. And I must say, I work on this issue of restitution since more than 20 years. In 2005, I had a project which was called Broken Memory. In 2005, where we spoke about the restitution of Benin royal artworks, and at that time we did not get the money for funding, and it was very difficult. There is in 25 where I worked with Peju Laiwola, and in 2005, when someone would have said to me, Nanette, in 2022 you will sign a contract of the transfer of ownership of an entire collection of more than 92 royal artworks from your museum in Cologne, I think I would not have believed it. But I think also I would not have believed it in 2019. So you have to, it is now like, okay, it's done. But in 2019, it was absolutely not the thing. So, and when I arrived in 2019 in the museum in Cologne, I did not know that there was such a huge collection of Benin artworks. I thought that we have perhaps some 10 royal artworks, and at the end we found out that we had 92 royal artworks hidden in our storages. So Peju Laiwola, I contacted her and I said, okay, Peju, now I am a director, come into my museum, and then work in the exhibition about anti-colonial resistance and speak about your resistance. And so Peju decided to show all the artworks in her exhibition and showing the entire inventory, but also she put them in front of the window so that also from outside the museum, people without paying a ticket, without entering the museum, could see all those Benin artworks. Here, for example, here was Peju Laiwola. Here another example of activists in Cologne who were invited to present a space about their activities in Cologne against racism. Another room, another small gallery in the exhibition curated by 2 activists from Namibia in order to speak about their fight for the recognition of the genocide of the Nama and Herero people in Namibia, the first genocide of the 20th century. Here you can see their statement, "It cannot be about us without us." So here also what was very interesting, and when we speak about providing platforms, that we here had a lot of problems between the Namibian activists who wanted to show pictures of the genocide of human remains, and at the same time the African diaspora in Cologne who said we don't want to see those images. So also here you are in this kind of discomfort, how to deal with it. And then at the end we have given, yes, we said, okay, when those two activists from Namibia would like to show this, we have to, and we work together with the community in order to deal with this problematic. Here also is space for about the biggest minority of Europe, the community of Sinti and Romas. Another space of young rebels who curated their own spaces. And at the end of the exhibition, so this exhibition was an ongoing and growing exhibition, and bit by bit it was filled by stories of anti-colonial resistance. And at the end of the exhibition, the last day, our mediators, they did their own protest demonstration in the exhibition. And they said, here you see, and they put this paper on the window of the exhibition, resist als Dauerausstellung. Resist, this exhibition has to become integrated into the permanent collection. And that was interesting, how in an exhibition about resistance, also activities of resistance and protest took place inside the museum. Other exhibitions so here you see the limits and the discomfort and the idea of staying with the trouble inside the museum. So here other growing exhibitions, but I see the time is coming and I would like to have time for a discussion. What is now? Okay, good. Okay, that is wonderful. I haven't seen it. Thank you very much. So here also an exhibition about love and what love has to do with colonialism. So here we opened also a growing exhibition in the museum. We opened it in December 2022, and we particularly worked with queer communities in the city of Cologne, in particular also queer people of color. Where also here, you see here, they, and those communities, they had a huge space where they organized their own events and parties and talks and produced also artworks which were presented after it in the exhibition space. Here you see their exhibition they made. But also here, we had this problem that now this exhibition we closed, but and we make a kind of we made a kind of evaluation with those different communities and activists who had curated this exhibition, that they said this museum is not a safe space, and the impossibility to create safe spaces in this kind of racist structures. So there were a lot of problems we were dealing with, and I think with this exhibition, I think I arrived at my limits. That I've seen that here the museum is not ready yet to create this kind of spaces, and I put people in danger when I invite them. And so here you see how difficult it is to open up your museum, and at the same time you know that your structure and your team also is not ready for this new road. I go other exhibitions like Invisible Inventories, or an exhibition about Against Forgetting, about Syria, with a Syrian curator for the Syrian community living in Cologne. I go further. Here, for example, also this is a a project initiated by Francis Oguma, who initiated a project which he calls Black in White Spaces, where this is only for people who are invited by Francis Oguma, and this is really like a statement for Francis Oguma that this space really in order to occupy actually the museum. So also here, this kind of events are completely autonomous, which take place in the museum in order to open it up, also for a new audience, but also in order to make our structure leaky, our internal structures. Leaky Archive, another project in order to make also the objects leaky, working on a digital level with artists from the Global South in order to create new stories about our objects hidden in our storages. So yeah, I take 3 minutes. So yes, in order, I won't have the time, but we can also discuss about it. You also have to create and to adapt also your design, how to create this fluidity in your exhibition design, in the idea of non-linear growing exhibitions. I go further, I won't have time. This was a project, an exhibition in 10 steps, which took place in Dresden before I came to Cologne. I was from 2015 until 2018 in Dresden in Leipzig. We don't have back, but I would like to because this is very important, so open up the museum, trying to open up the museum and to get in people in order to change the structures that also the museum itself will be able to change. So it is a kind of open the doors for resistance from outside. And of course, you see also here the limits in terms of bureaucracy, in terms of racism and discrimination inside our structures or amongst our audience. So the museum is not a safe space. So in order we make it leaky, and of course also we give it back. We give back, and restitution is part of our daily practice. Giving back, but how do we it before giving back, during giving back, and after giving back? So before giving back is enabling demonstrations and protests in front of the museum. Here you see activists from Cologne, from Paris, and from the African diaspora who were organizing a demonstration for the restitution of the Benin bronzes in 2022. Here you see, for example, a day. Here we got a request for restitution of a sacred sculpture, and this is an ongoing request. And so we tried to open up the discussion, and even before it comes in the politics, we organized in July a day, a public discussion about the restitution and why this royal family from this royal delegation from Bangwa, from Cameroon, wants this sacred object back. Pejulaiwola in a next exhibition in I Miss You. So also here we create a lot of discussions about restitution between local communities from the diaspora and people from the Global South who are asking for restitution. Also discussions, here for example, organized and initiated by the Nigerian diaspora in order to speak about restitution, but also about broken memory and colonial trauma. I go further here. Because I think also the thing before and during restitution, it's very important to offer a democratic space for discussion about restitution, but also the aftermath of restitution. What happens after restitution? And here in an exhibition, The Shadows of Things, we tried also to speak about what are the fragments, what do an object leave? What is the presence of absence of an object once it leaves the museum? I don't have time, but here I would like to finish this last picture, because this was, for example, here you see a fantastic discussion in my museum of my former core audience who are protesting here in the middle, this was in the middle of COVID, against the politics of the museum, against the idea that we have to open the doors, and we try to make this museum leaky. So staying with the trouble is staying with all this. And we have to go further. I hope that I will have a couple of days left to stay with the trouble in my museum, but I'm sure there will be other curators and directors who will continue staying with the trouble. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to listen this. Probably for the colleagues that are not working with this kind of objects that are in the so-called ethnographic museums, it's like handling permanently with a strange hospitality. Welcome to my house, where I keep the body of your family and the most sacred objects of you. So, and I really like this staying with the travel. For many years ago, I had the opportunity to work with Jette many years ago, and I learned that we don't need to be afraid of the conflict. And you, as a director of this kind of collections and history, I wonder how you handle with this incredible trouble of having the heritage of non-European in a European building, and with the structures of power that they are not so different from the period when the objects were collected.
Yeah, Adriaan, that's a difficult question, because how I ask myself very often how to deal with this violence, with this deeply violent story. And when I'm in we spoke this morning about storages, and that is when you are in the storages of the museum, you feel all those stories who are stored in our storages, and how to deal with it. And that is what I think when I think of my life in museums. I started working in ethnographic museums in 1995 in the Museum of Mankind, Musée de l'Homme in Paris. This was immediately, I tried to give their stories back. And I think that is also the archival work is very important. That is what I did in France, trying to give their voice back. And because I wasn't able to open up the doors for others. So, for example, in Paris, in the Museum of Mankind, and after at the Quai Branly Museum, also I worked in the database. And I remember when I was young, here we are at the end of the 90s, I put the keyword in our database of the Quai Branly Museum, looted objects, because I was in charge of the archive, of the collection archive. So I had the time to read this entire archive. So every time when I found in a letter that an object has been stolen or had been taken in a violent context, I put it in the database, looted, butin colonial, colonial looting. Here we are in the 90s. So I think it is very important that you resist also inside the structures and you invent your own methods of resistance. And once director in Saxony, yeah, when I was there, and then becoming director, it is even much more violent, because you cannot anymore be in the underground, so you are exposed, and at the same time you are responsible for all that violence. And I remember one day when I was in the storages in Dresden, and I saw all those human remains, all those bodies. This was, I think, for me, this was in February 2015, and I will never forget that moment. Because you feel that responsibility as director from how to create a little bit of justice. And there I found out, when you are a director, you can be a little bit more a bulldozer, and you are able to open up the doors, even if the structure is even in a structure which doesn't like it very much. So I had to quit Saxony in 2018 because it became very complicated. In 2017, we organized the very first restitution of human remains in Hawaii. Now Leontine Mensch van Meijer is following this road, so I'm very happy that after I quit Saxony, Leontine Meijer van Mens, also award winner last year with me and Wayne Modest, and that is fantastic. Now I am in Cologne, and there in Cologne, of course, Cologne is a very so-called multicultural society when you compare it to Saxony. And so here I thought, here I really have the possibility to open up the doors and to open up the doors to the diaspora, in order also to give them access to their heritage. But you have to deal with it, and you must have a very thick skin in order to survive in this system. But when I compare it, 2022 with 1995, I think that in more than 25 years, yes, we have reached a little bit something, I think. And I think every time when we are doing something in the museum, somewhere there's always something, even if it's a little bit what rest. But of course, you deal every day with this toxicity. And that is not only difficult for me as a director, that is difficult for my staff, but it is particularly difficult for people who are working in the museum, which has links with the Global South, who are born in the Global South, or parents or grandparents from the Global South. And that is a huge responsibility also as director, how to protect them, how to offer them a safer space, and how to accompany those people who are much more involved in this violent story. So we are dealing with colonial trauma and with colonial ghosts daily in the museum. Yeah.
Thank you. I am going to do one question, but the audience can think questions. I want to ask you, because you are talking about this colonial trauma and handling with this, and when you are in the middle between these people that was collected, or the objects were collected, and the ancestors were collected, and you have at the same time this staff trying to reproduce the practices of the last 100 years, how you handle, especially with feelings, because we often talk about politics, but seldom we remember that everything there, it's incredibly painful.
Yeah, and that is, well, for example, when we were I showed you some pictures of this royal delegation from Bangla, from Cameroon, when they came in July. For them, it was extremely painful to see this sacred object, this subject, after more than 100 years. And you see at the same time that the structure, even unconsciousness, I think, is so I don't know how to say. I think very much you must be a little bit empathic. It is not that difficult. That is sometimes I do not really understand why it's so difficult because you have to accompany those people and to show a lot of respect and to be very conscious of your role and of your power you have. And I think so it is. Embracing all this, but when you are, so there is not a solution for it. But I think you must be very, very, very careful that everything what you say, every rule, every bureaucratic rule in the museum, the whole ritual of welcoming a delegation or a group of people. This whole ritual it is a ritual, and I think that had particular steps, and that is what we are working also on it in the museum to create a kind of code of conduct, how to avoid or how to make it as safe as possible in this violent space. And that is almost an impossible task. So it is, yes, I do not have we are really working on it, but at least I think it is very important to be very, very conscious of it, that you can even re-traumatize people when you restitute, or when you enable restitution.
It's any question in the audience? Yeah.
Good morning. Hello. Good morning. My name is Daniel Bouw from Museum Boijmans van Beuningen in Rotterdam. Thank you so much for your overwhelming presentation, very relevant and important. And of course, you are a museum for cultures, and I work in an art museum, and there are many people working at different kind of museums. How can you help us getting your policy towards us so that we can be better museums, because we do have to make an effort. As I told yesterday in my presentation, we cannot stay white. We should invite people of color, different communities, to be relevant for everyone. But it's your standard procedure, but it's not ours. So can you help us exchange ideas and information so we can be better museums? And is there a platform to do that? Thank you. And can you please talk into the microphone, because it's...
More close?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, I don't have an instructions of use. And that is, but I think just do it. And that is, for me, sometimes the problem of when people speak about decolonizing museums or diversifying museums. It's very easy. When I find a lot of fantastic people who are coming from the global south or people of color from the diaspora. There are plenty of it. Every time I hear from colleagues, no, we don't find him, I could diversify the entire German culture, all the German cultural institutions. So, but I think you must be a little bit drastic. But I am a troublemaker. So I think you must have troublemakers and making allies inside your own structures. And when you are a director, trying really every time, when you have the possibility to find someone for your team, which is often very complicated because I'm also dealing with it. But every time I try to find people with an international background who come up into the team. And I think bit by bit, you can change also a structure from the inside. But it is a daily fight. And then, of course, when you work with communities, and you can do that, of course, in art museums as well. It is only in ethnographic museums, the violence is so visible, or the invisibility is so visible. And in art museums, you are not confronted directly to it. Only you have to, when you really dig in it, you can find it. But I really think it is a shift of mentality, and just drastically open the doors, try to have interdisciplinary teams. And also, and I think for me, this It's Yours rooms, for example, in Resist, is also every time when you work with a partner, with a group of people, you invite them every time for every next project or exhibition in order to build up really relations of trust. And I think trust is extremely important. So, for example, for the Resist exhibition in 2021, we worked with a group of people in-house, and since then we work every time. Sometimes they come in my museum and I say, hey, what are you doing here? Oh, this evening I have organized an event. And here you have to open up the doors, and sometimes, so you must be a little bit, yes, so it is. You have to accept, you have to stay with the trouble, and to say goodbye to your own methodology, and also to make risks. Sometimes it's not that good. And also to confront your core audience who is not happy with it. And then you say, okay, then that's a pity. And so it is, there must be a form of radicalism, I think. But I don't think this is very sustainable. When I speak about my own job, I'm not a very beloved person. So that's the deal. That is really the deal. So I can come to you, to Rotterdam, and we are partners. We, the cities, Rotterdam and Cologne, are connected with each other. So we have a project together.
Thank you very much for your inspiring talk. I'm Gundula Bavendam from Berlin. You spoke about the open spaces you are giving to communities from Cologne and elsewhere. And you spoke about the conflicts between, if I understood correctly, people coming from the Global South and the Cologne diaspora, about showing pictures or not showing certain pictures, but you didn't tell us how you resolved this conflict. So I would be interested in how did you reconcile those positions? Thank you.
Yeah, this was a very interesting moment, and also a complicated moment, because Esther Mnyangu, this activist from Namibia, she even asked me at the beginning, Annette, I really would like to put human remains in my gallery. And she sent me these, because this was in the middle of COVID, so it was a kind of digital curatorship. Actually, she had to come, and she already knew the museum and so on. So, and then I said and then we spoke. We also worked with mediators and live speakers, and among them were several people with connections with the African continent, and they said they were completely shocked. So we did talks, and Esther Menyango, she said also, I'm ready to speak with those people who are afraid to be re-traumatized by it. So this was a kind of compromise, and here you see the limits when you say, okay, the floor is yours, autonomous spaces. That is, of course, autonomous spaces in this structure. I have the financial budget, and I always can decide to change the project or so on. So here you see the limits of giving platforms. So we have discussed a lot, and after that we put a trigger warning, and the diaspora was really informed about what was inside. After that, we didn't show human remains. Esther Menyango presented also, explained in the exhibition why she wanted to show it, in order to confront what she said, the Germans with their responsibility. So it is also a matter of taking time. So this work, and that's why there is very often so much resistance also in our structures and in our teams, because this takes a lot of time, because you have to accompany all those different voices and to embrace. So this is really staying with the trouble, but actually after that, there was a kind of, it has been accepted, but this is really, it was a really interesting moment where you see that giving platforms can also be complicated. And that is what Adriano said. This is really, yes, embracing discomfort and conflicts. And nobody at the end is really happy. It is always a kind of compromise. And when you are a director and people and curators who are doing this job, you always have to, like an acrobat, and to go like a boat on a stormy sea.
Thank you very much. I know what you mean.
Thank you so much, Nanette, and all the audience. And it was funny that we both took Galeano. It was really nice. And please, thank you again. An applause. Thank you.